Right. Welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you this day, this Wednesday, and especially excited to have Bill Neal with us. Good day, Bill. How are you?
I'm good, Hal. I'm uh, I'm riding the national waves of what just happened Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, to turn the Capitol upside down and leave foreign capitals scratching their heads
Well, all of
over.
us are scratching our heads, aren't we? William Arneal with us, williamarneal.substack.com, and he is my go-to guy for congressional events, and I'm lucky that he puts up with me and comes on our program. So we're going to try to make sense of the interim debt deal, I guess we can call it, in which you wrote about which you wrote a long piece where you, I think it's fair to say, excoriated the Democrats and their negotiating tactics, if you want to call them that. And then there was even more developments with the leader of the Republicans, who I think you praised his ability to jam through a bill which the Republicans wanted. The Democrats, I think you believe, opposed and didn't like. But then the Republicans turned on him and kicked him out. So a lot to make
Yeah,
sense of.
how my piece was really a polemic. It was short, and you're right. It was very tough on Democrats, and I got blowback from that. Believe me, from emails and so forth. And I understand that. I answered one online that was from Maryland, and we can talk about that, and we should. I hope I'm not seen as praising Speaker McCarthy. The New Yorker ran an article in December as he was going to accede to the speakership, likely, and everybody in his career was talking about the fact they couldn't find a core set of values with McCarthy, and that plagued him. And I think that has held true. So I said, "He who dares wins." That's been the motto of the wreckers since Newt Gingrich. They are willing to take on tactics, the shutdown, essentially, that the Democrats still, even after the Obama, face-off, shutdown, and pressure, haven't been able to cope with. And that was really the deeper thought, longer historical thought in my polemic. My God, and then we thought we had a deal with an untrustworthy guy, President Biden. This was to prevent the debt ceiling, and that was an agreement in let's see, March, I think. And McCarthy betrayed that by not reining in the caucus, who wanted deeper cuts than Biden thought on the domestic side. And so McCarthy's been betraying everybody, and he got what he deserved. You can't govern a great country with these type of tactics. And the question is, other than Republican self-destruction, what's the Democratic answer to the tactics that's been going on since Clinton and Obama? My God. I mean, so when I said they were intellectually bankrupt, and I have something more in mind, you noticed, your listeners must have noticed if you read or watch, all the Republicans, even the dignified conservatives, bring up $33 trillion in debt. And you haven't heard a word from the Democratic Party as to, well, is it too much, too little? If it's too much, what do we do about it? It's just kind of assumed that it's there. And in truth, the bond markets are just reacting now, today, especially, not to the debt, but to the chaos. They haven't been sending signals that they can't live with this debt. Wall Street's happy. We have full employment. So it's a very complex situation. And the public and the Democratic Party followers, I think, where's the 1 or 2 page fact sheet to answer what's been going on since Clinton in terms of where the Republican right's going? They do stand for ideas. They're catastrophic ideas. The Democrats, it's a lot murkier. they're not a whole party either. So that's my broader take. And yeah, I was pretty tough. I can see how you could look at what happened Saturday as saying, hey, the Democrats came out pretty well, but we've still got, the a shutdown looming, more chaos in the Republican Party, and no clear answer from the Democratic Party as to how to answer what is driving the Republicans, the anti-government, anti-tax. It's where are they going? I think.
I mean, it's very unclear actually with the ouster of McCarthy. And we'll get into that a little bit, why he was ousted. But I'm going to take some pretty diametrically opposed positions from you. Not that I'm going to say how great the Republicans are, but I think with respect to this particular dynamic, I'm going to give McCarthy praise. He got the bill through that kept the government going. I spoke to some folks who are struggling economically, and I think they were relieved. They had concerns about the checks that they receive, Social Security and the like. They probably would have still gotten them, but that's always a risk and always something that people worry about. And frankly, I love this deal. The only thing that wasn't included in it, as I understand it, was more money for Ukraine. And you and I fundamentally 100% disagree on this. I think we shouldn't be funding Ukraine. This was certainly not the way we've been doing so. Plus, I would say that, the idea, we're leaving Ukraine out to dry is very unfair, because the letter that Republicans sent to Biden and his administration a little over a month ago said, hey, we want answers to these questions. How much longer is this going to go on? How's the counteroffensive going? Where is the money that we're sending to Ukraine winding up? Are we keeping track of it? Is there any auditing? To me, those are very reasonable questions that the American public absolutely deserve response to. And I'll just finally throw this out there. In terms of democracy, most Americans don't want us to be sending billions and billions of dollars with no end in sight to a war zone where there's a stalemate. There's alternatives. So I just, what is not to like about this particular deal?
Well, apparently McCarthy and the Democrats, including Biden, had an agreement that there would be a vote independent of that deal. And the Democratic speakers that have addressed it indicate they have a majority with Republican support in both houses to continue the aid. And we probably never going to agree on this, Hal. We talked a bit privately about this. I think Putin understands the dynamics in the West better than a lot of Western people. He knows that democracy is under pressure, if not on the run in most places. Social democracy, democratic socialism, even liberal left has failed to capture new working majorities. Let's leave it at a high level like that. The public's disillusionment and the shifting poll numbers, which are not catastrophic yet, they have moved in the direction you've indicated. I never, you just can't do foreign policy on quick shifts in polls. It's more complex than that. And I mentioned to you privately that, in 1939, 1940, there was probably a majority of Americans who did not want to go and back England militarily to stop Hitler. And indeed, we never did. Germany declared war on us before we decided that we had a way in. So it conveniently removed that from a congressional decision. Right after Pearl Harbor, Germany took the issue out of our hands. And that's worrisome. I do part if you believe Stalin,
if you believe, not Stalin, if you believe that Putin is indeed Hitler, then I think you have a stronger argument for supporting more military aid. But you could also make the argument that if Putin is Hitler, the way to respond is to just try to assassinate him, if he is indeed Hitler. I don't accept that. I don't think there's the evidence of genocide. And I don't view Russia as nearly the threat to the world that that Germany was. The two biggest threats to world peace are right now U.S. and China.
Leaving it as a full equation of equality of evil, no, is stating it too strong. Have no illusions. If Putin pushes Ukraine further back, you will have, well, there have been findings of genocide and war crimes, activities that make up those formal human rights charges already. And I have no question, no doubts that that inside Ukraine, that will happen. And the question,
but we haven't seen that really from Putin. I know there's some examples of him atrocities that he's committed, but that's the same goes for us with it in terms of atrocities in Iran, in Iraq, not Iran, and in the Middle East more generally.
Deporting children from their parents in areas that the Russians have.
But we separate children from their parents at the border who are trying
to send them back for indoctrination.
Again, we've separated, people coming to this country seeking a better life often have found their children removed from their care. So I just think it's not so helpful.
A long list of how Mearsheimer does this, and the advocates of not going to war on behalf of Ukraine, of all the sins that the U.S. has committed against other people, conduct in Vietnam, Central America, no question about it. And but that it doesn't change the reality of what Putin is up to and his conduct. It's interesting when we talk about this. This is important for the congressional debate.
Well, let me just cut you off again real quick.
I started in 1991 from a Ukraine that had territorial integrity by a majority vote, including the areas Russia has now taken over, not from the dates that Mearsheimer and the anti-war people all use to pick up action. I start from 1991 and their own vote that was the country's borders they wanted. And you take it from there, and that is a long story. Maybe we do another show on that. But
let me just say, if you want to look at history, you can also look at the American record, at least since Vietnam, of our getting involved, and the slippery slope trickled down from a few advisors going in, military supplies, military support, and then full-blown war. So that has often ended absolutely disastrously. Certainly, Vietnam is a great example of that, a terrible example, but an accurate one. Likewise, what we've been doing in the Middle East has redounded to the detriment of everyone, including ourselves.
Yeah, I try not to be a doctrinaire about foreign policy issues. And yes, I do break with the left on the threat that Putin poses and the importance of supporting Ukraine, and the fact that it hasn't been going well, as I've laid out very carefully many times. And I think I have the agreement of most former high U.S. NATO officials and British officials that it's been Biden's caution, a common theme here, and talk about the Democrats, over caution in supplying the weapons to break that stalemate. Denials that we would never impose on our own troops or NATO troops when facing the defenses that Russia has built without our intervention and direction. So that's it. But let's
aren't we giving them some very, very deadly weapons, cluster bombs that have been formerly have been banned because of the dangers they pose long after they've been deployed?
But not the 2 or 3 decisive ones that are talked about in serious military strategy. The ATACMS 150 to 180 mile range weapon missiles, ground-to-air missiles, and F-16 aircraft, and then our modern Western and American main battle tanks, which have gone in a trickle, not enough to make a difference. 30 Abrams, they're not all there yet. facing World War I and World War II type trench systems with
Well, then shouldn't we, if we're
you're not getting through them. That's
all
all.
right. Well, we're talking to William R. Neal. It's Halitics. I'm Hal. William R. Neal, author, is with us. You can read his writings at williamrneal.substack.com. That's E before I in Neal. And click subscribe, please, in the bottom right corner. We're really going through we're actually getting into a little more detail than I had thought we would previous to the debt vote. But with respect to, I think it becomes important, at least, and we can agree to disagree. But if you believe, as I do, that it's the right thing to do to cut off aid to cut off additional aid to Ukraine, then you can understand why I would like this deal, because it doesn't cut support to the other, to other entitlements or to entitlements that American people rely upon to survive.
Understood, Hal. I mean, I do understand that point of view. It's different than mine, but I do want to say something about the Saturday dynamics and whether the Democrats had the right response. Since Gingrich, the Republicans have used this kind of Friday night teenage head-on driving at high speeds to see who would chicken out in a head-on collision. And the collision factor, of course, is shutting down the federal government. It's wielding almost a terrorist tactic in fiscal terms, but implications for lives, to make that the club that one party holds over the other, to get what they couldn't get in terms of voting majorities under the basic rules of the game. And how long has that been? Since 1995 and 96 under Clinton, a very long time, almost 40 or 50 years now. And the Democrats have come up with no convincing response that gets them the majorities where they can just, overrule this. It's the divided Congress, the fact that neither party can capture working majorities, that makes this tactic especially useful and dangerous. And the analogy I make, coming back to Ukraine, is the way Putin wields the threat of using nuclear weapons. If you're really afraid of it and you're really afraid of the shutdown, you don't have many other options than to give in. The Dems gave in on Ukraine. They thought they were going to get a vote. It hasn't happened. And then the other side of the deal, which apparently nobody has criticized, the Saturday deal, was increasing funding for natural disasters. And I'm scratching my head. I can find statistics going back 10 years that FEMA puts up and NOAA puts up, two federal agencies, over the rising cost in terms of billions of the major weather events. Why is that happening? Well, we all know on the center left, at least, it's climate change. So you can make predictions about what you have to have in the budget that takes into account the average and a little more. So I'm not sure how did that, how was that not solved in the gross agreement that Biden thought he had with McCarthy? Because the data is there, other than the ideology got in the way. So they had to throw in responding, I think, probably to Hawaii mostly, to throw in more money. But you got a budget for what the data shows is happening. It's there. It's not makeup or fantasy land. The other thought I had was, why not make the fossil fuel companies fund that budget, that specific line item for quote natural disasters, which are driven by public policy, Republican policy, and fossil fuel industry policy. And yeah, at any rate, but so nobody talked about that, but that was another reason for unhappiness. I'm saying,
Well, wait,
yeah,
let me jump in there because I'm really glad you brought that up, and I had ignored that point. But isn't that actually? And I agree with you. The funding should come from those responsible. But all that said, isn't it still good that there's more money for victims of these disasters like Maui? I mean, that seems to be something we should be happy about.
Of course, Hal, on humanitarian terms, but I'm talking about uh, why that wasn't in the budget outlines that were agreed to, between Biden and McCarthy, because as I say, the data to know what you have to budget for was clear, and you have to budget more. And I looked at the funds; they're underfunded. So yes, you're right. If there was a shortage, it had to be made up if they couldn't cover what happened in Hawaii. But the question is why are they continually miscalculating? The trend is very, very obvious, and the ability to predict what you need. And you go on the long side, because if you don't use it, I hope it earns interest with interest rates rising. It can earn 4 to 5% now if it goes into bonds. So make it a fund, not that's
No, I mean, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And the Republic, I think that's a very fair point, but it's also the Democrats deserve, and I don't think you would disagree with this, deserve a lot of censure too, because when they've had majorities, they've not made an issue of this.
Yes, that's right.
So in a way, right. I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around on both ends. Now, also, just again, you're listening to Halitics. Click like, please. Click subscribe, bottom right. We got to get those. I really want to get those subscriber numbers up. And if we have someone great like Bill, he deserves a large audience. So I really
agree entirely. Yes.
Yes, of course he does. WilliamRneal.substack.com. There's just so much to get into, so many different kind of little complications. And but you mentioned how, and I showed the slide there from CNBC where there was a potential deal between McCarthy and Biden to put the funds back on the table, and that's out the window now because the funds for Ukraine, that's out the window, of course, because McCarthy's out. So isn't this another example of, I wouldn't say McCarthy as much as just the right-wing MAGA Freedom Caucus Republicans wielding every weapon at their disposal to get what they want, while we see milquetoast Democrats like our friend there, Jamie Raskin, now extolling the benefits of Hakeem Jeffries' speakership, which is never going to happen.
Yeah, how that as I've been trying to emphasize, the Democrats, when I said that they were intellectually bankrupt, that might be overstating it, but they've never come up with a response. Going back to Newt Gingrich, to take a case, on a TV ads or handouts, even that you can post online, putting the pressure on Republicans for. And when I made those phone calls to protest Saturday before the Senate vote, I called the fire eaters in the Republican caucus that were driving this, 4 or 5 of them, and I compared them to the fire eaters from South Carolina that led the Confederate States out of the Union in 1861 after Lincoln had won the election. And that is how I believe the Democrats have to frame it. They are destroying democracy. And if the Democrats are unwilling to take on their major rational case about the shape of and size of the federal government and the deficit and what to do about it, the Democrats, they look hollow. And they haven't come up with a response other than, riding the worst out, pulling back, being tight-lipped, and waiting for the other side, the more daring and reckless side, make fools of themselves. But they don't always, they're lucking out. and the Republican Party may be destroying right now between Trump's legal troubles and this fiasco, their chances for 2024. I mean, that's the best.
I've got a clip of Matt Gaetz I want to play, and also of the Washington Post, and I think it's very disingenuous in a way what caused Gaetz to move to for the no confidence vote that led directly to really that's not what they call it they call it a motion to vacate the speakership, but call it whatever. When I say no confidence, he doesn't have the confidence of a majority of the members of the House. He's out. Why didn't the Democrats? I mean, McCarthy got the vast majority of Republican votes. When I look at Raskin posturing in this image, he loves the crowd, he loves the cameras, this is what he lives for. I don't understand if you're going to say, oh, I think Hakeem Jeffries, the representative from Wall Street and AIPAC should be the speaker. Why not? And that's not going to happen. Why not just give McCarthy the votes to stay speaker? I mean, if he had this deal, why not just say, go ahead, you can stay, Speaker McCarthy?
Yeah, how that's party tradition. It would be an enormous, it might be a diplomatic and save the Republic type gesture to cross party lines. It's a huge step, which I think the institutional Democrats can't make, and I understand that in some senses. But we're forgetting, we've left out one thing in the Saturday drama, which helped lead me to my very tough stance on the Democrats. When McCarthy did the switcheroo, apparently the paperwork was extensive in terms of what was in the bill that eventually prevented the shutdown by 45 days. Continuing resolution is what it was called. And, unless you think the guy that the Democrat who pulled the fire alarm is on the edge, he's a pretty smart and intelligent guy. And I think that action reflected that the alarm, to put it in stark terms, that they were being tricked without having the time to read what the new agreement was. Everybody, I mean, the level of distrust is so high that they didn't want to say yes right away, and they needed time. I mean, I can't explain it otherwise. And he's going to pay for it, or at least the Republicans will try to make him equate that act to January 6th. But I think we're leaving that out of the on the spot feel of what's going on.
Well, is that
what are we agreeing to? Right?
Can you clarify that a little bit more? What you're saying, I guess, is, or let me see if I can recapitulate what you just said. Yeah, William Neal with us, is that when Congressman Bowman was, I guess, trying to get to the floor, that's what he says. I was trying to get to the floor. Right. I got stuck in the bowels of the House building, and I couldn't get to the Capitol. So I pulled this alarm, which I thought was just to kind of let people know I needed to be let in, not that it was a real fire alarm, which I think is somewhat plausible, to be perfectly honest, because I've looked at the signage, and it is a little bit. This is something Brianna Joy Gray, another live streamer, was talking about. I do think that signage, to be frank, is somewhat confusing. I get what happened there, but so you're saying is the Democrats really should have voted no, or voted abstain or something to keep the possibility of the deal alive, but make sure that they were okay with it. But don't you think? And I understand that. I think that's what you're saying. But don't you think, though, that they probably did get a green light from the White House? They wouldn't have voted yes without that green light. And that green light was based on an understanding, maybe not explicit, but implicit, that there would be a standalone vote on funding for Ukraine.
Yeah, Hal, here's the thing. I had not heard the twist that you've put on it, that Bowman was not there, in a sense, and was trying to get himself back into the voting action But my understanding before this wasn't just him. Many Democrats reacted with a panic when they saw the potential deal that they haven't read. I don't know how many pages it was, hundreds, I think. And it's entirely possible to try to explain Jamal Bowman's reaction and his dilemma that the inside, that the White House and the Dem leadership didn't share the deal with the rest of their caucus. They were just supposed to go along. And a lot of people felt that was unfair. I'm giving Bowman the credit for being more dignified, brighter, and tougher than a lot of other people. You just don't pull a fire alarm if you have any other better options. But I could be wrong. I mean, I don't know him personally.
Well, I don't really. I mean, it didn't look good, right? I mean, of course, it never looks good.
It looks
if there's no fire, you don't pull a fire alarm. But again, if you actually look at the sign, it's a little bit. I kind of get the confusion there. I do. I don't have an image of that, but I'm not going to cast aspersions. There are lots of things about Jamal Bowman I'm not happy about, but this isn't. Right. This is pretty far down that list. Do you think, well, let me say it this way. Don't they run a very big risk if they don't agree to this deal? You seem to think they don't. And I'll show you the, I'll try to put on the screen exactly what you wrote. You seem to think that, or you do think, you don't seem to think, you clearly believe that the Democrats could have said no and they would have come out of this looking fine. But again, I'll get back to putting aside whether we do or don't, putting aside our disagreement about whether we should be funding Ukraine, given the political reality that many, many millions, tens of millions of Americans are struggling themselves, that despite, a low unemployment number, and despite the fact that inflation has been coming down lately, prices are still higher than they've been. It's still more unaffordable than ever for most Americans to live a decent, secure life. Given that, didn't Democrats run a pretty big risk if they staked their claim to vote no on insistence on, as you put it, honoring a commitment to Ukraine, a commitment that most Americans, and we can disabuse, putting aside whether it's the right or wrong policy, it's not a popular policy right now.
Yeah, well, I'll concede that to you, Hal, if you put, faith in recently rapidly changing polls from September, the CNN poll. But the numbers are not a catastrophic reversal. They're moving in the direction you indicated, and so forth. But here's the thing. It leaves the threat of a government shutdown as the radicals' club of choice, a tactic to pry out from this crisis. It's Van Diesel tactics, right? Friday night teenagers with high-powered, high-speed cars daring each other. And the Democrats aren't doing the daring, but the Republican right is. And the Democrats have a choice to give ground out of fear of what you just said, that the public hates shutdowns, as they rightly should. But how do you ever break the cycle? And maybe Republicans have broken it for good by, this institutional collapse. I think the Wall Street Journal said they hung themselves, but we'll see whether that registers in polls and so forth. But the Democrats put themselves in this position after 40 years of having no ready institutional response to the tactic other than to jettison some things and compromise. And don't forget, Obama was going to go into possibly privatizing Social Security. And when you talk about that $33 billion federal debt, you don't get it down without two big, awful possibilities: raising taxes or cutting into the bone of the accepted social safety net, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And neither of those propositions could get winning majorities, I think, in Congress for either party.
Well, why
So,
don't the Democrats campaign explicitly on raising taxes on the wealthy? We talk about popular policies. The great majority of Americans would love to see taxes go up on, say, anyone making over $1 million. And they would love to see estate taxes go up on any estate worth over, say, 10 million or 20 million, whatever. The Democrats seem incapable of speaking in one voice in support of these policies that not only are good, I mean, they would objectively be good for this country. They also would be objectively politically good for the Democrats.
In our opinion, Hal, I agree with you that. However, remember what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2020. I mean, what are the interior force lines? Who were the power brokers inside the Democratic Party? Sanders had a lot of momentum. He had won, New Hampshire and Nevada, right? And Biden was on the run. And then we were facing South Carolina when James Clyburn seemed to be the key actor to rally all the conservative forces of the Democratic Party and say, we'll never do this. We're going to go for Biden. And the response inside the party was universal. I mean, that's the highest. This is for Sanders, it was the pick at charge moment. And the Democratic Party showed where their deepest feelings and the lovers of power are. They just shut the door on Sanders. That was the most dramatic stone wall I've ever seen come out of, well, we know it's not from nowhere, but so dramatically. And it was right before the South Carolina primary. And that's your answer to, would they ever, they would have no chance to do that logical tax increase if you want to control the debt, the $33 billion debt under these circumstances, without a coherent national program to sell it. And, and that's what's missing, just as it's missing on the federal shutdown tactic. They're winging it. They're winging it because they do not have a coherent majority winning philosophy or set of policies that flow out of that nationwide. And that's where we are. And you can't, and we probably should talk about the border situation.
Well, before we get there, a couple of thoughts came to mind as we talked to William Arneel. You can see his name right there on the screen. By the way, you want to call, you want to talk to us, 240-363-7190. We've got about another 20 minutes or so to go. Love talking to Bill. And one thing, Bill and I get into it, we have heated disagreements, but one thing I really enjoy about talking to him, and we mentioned this to each other yesterday, is, at least from my perspective, we can do this without it becoming personal, without feeling resentment, at least towards feeling the other person's motives are not legitimate. I mean, I know my motives are good because I'm not making any money out of any of this. So I have there's nothing corrupt. I may be wrong, but I'm not doing it out of selfishness or trying to manipulate people to believe something that it'll benefit me if they believe it. And I know William is in the same boat. So
it would be nice, Sal, if I got some funding.
I would say we both would love that.
If you want to write, you have to subscribe, buy a lot of books and a lot of periodicals so you can at least pretend you know what you're talking about. Nobody's funding me. So coming out of my Social Security retirement, that's where things are. So
if you write, even if you've had a bestseller, I read a really very sad article. I think it was in the Washington Post by a writer who had written a very highly regarded bestseller that I myself read, and I had no idea. And he said, "I have no money." He said, "One bestseller isn't enough. You have to just keep churning them out. The first book deal isn't very good."
Thomas Frank is somebody who I think we're both familiar with. I've read a lot of his books. I do know him. He's been on my email list for a long time. He's in the same situation, and he's an incredibly good writer. And we have our differences, but on the whole, he would agree with our agreement about taxing the wealthy. And he wrote a book called The Wrecking Crew, which it came out, I think, pre-Obama or near that, which was essentially the charge that given Republican philosophy, when you put them in positions of institution and power, they want to destroy and wreck any aspect of a functioning state coming out of the New Deal. And he was attacked so furiously for that view, and yet he ought to go back on the book tour with that book because it's so true.
Well, he also gets an awful lot of criticism because he doesn't spare the Democrats. I think that if he only focused on Republicans, he would be a darling of the center left. And he would be on MSNBC, CNN, if that's even still a network, I'm not sure anymore. But because he is, he's contemptuous of the Democrats, he views them as both feckless and corrupt. I believe rightly so. He's pretty much persona non grata. He has to survive on his book sales, and that's not always easy to do. And even if you have a bestseller, maybe it's on the charts for a few weeks, it may not reflect that many sales. And even then, the author doesn't get that much out of any one particular sale until they've got a track record and they can really negotiate a hell of a good deal from the publishers. I have a couple of questions. We're both critical for slightly different reasons and sometimes overlapping reasons of the Democrats. Is it fair to distinguish between local and state Democratic parties and the party at the federal level? And I'll give you an example. As I understand it, Minnesota and Wisconsin have both made some really progressive changes in state governance because they've managed to elect, Wisconsin very recently, sizable Democratic majorities. So those states appear to be moving further to the left than we're likely to see from Congress in our lifetime. So is it fair to say, well, we can reject the Democratic Party on a national level, but on the local level, they're doing good. They're good people.
Well, how the traditional poli-sci response in America is, local state governments, especially sometimes local, are the laboratories of democracy. And going back to the progressive movement, that's where we experiment, see whether things work. You can argue that under FDR as governor of New York, a lot of the directions that went national under the New Deal were tried, especially the Civilian Conservation Corps in New York State first. And boy, New York with New York City and a rural upstate is a pretty good representative testing ground for the nation as it stood in 1932. But I got into a disagreement with Bill Grider, the late Bill Grider, I said that we had an email group that privately discussed national affairs. And I said the great failure of the Democratic Party, has not come up with a coherent national message which can apply to all states, independent of local things. And I said, if you believe in local experiments and good government directions, the Saul Alinsky people had come up with a national program that worked at the non-ideological local level. Of course, corporations said they were always coming after them as polluters. But that was a model in New Jersey, and a lot of people liked it. But it was never able to scale up to be a national program. And I think that's the great mistake of the left. We have a lot of localists, a lot of back to the landers think this way. If you can't compete with the Republican Party with a coherent national ideology and program, you're in big trouble. And the Republicans are proving that bad ideas, if intensely held, triumph over, the wishy-washy compromises that Democrats need to hold a fractured and disparate group of causes together. And that's the tragedy here. We've been living with it really since the late Carter
Well,
administration.
and let me just say that and then I have a second question, a follow up. I don't want to forget it, and it relates to alternatives to the Democrats. But up until and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You got a couple, maybe 2 or 3 years on me here, Bill. From the New Deal, at least until the end of the 60s and the early 70s, there was an animating mission, I would say, behind the Democratic Party. There was a central idea, which was we support the quality of life. We support making the quality of life better for working people. And they pursued that, sometimes fitfully, sometimes they didn't push it nearly as aggressively as I think they should have. But they did stand, ultimately, it seemed, there was a commitment to a certain kind of rough economic justice and fairness for the working class. And that's been abandoned. Is there any way to, assuming that's a correct analysis, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is there any way to get back to that? Or is the money too much? It wouldn't be possible given the realities of today's politics.
Yeah, and that was, I think, Thomas Frank's last book, Listen, Liberal, was tracing the desertion of the Democratic Party from the New Deal ideal of representing the bottom 60% in terms of policies, economic transfers. How it occurred to me last night, I talk about Republican repeatedly bringing out the $33 trillion federal debt. They never bring up, and this has been, I repeat my writings, the RAND study that showed that from what we're talking about, 1975 to 2018, I think was the limit of their study, 53 trillion, bigger than the current federal debt, went from the bottom 60% of the population to the top 10%. Now, there's the Democratic answer to talking about who's, big numbers and what they mean. And that is your answer here. It changed. That money went upward because of the corporate ability starting in 1971 with the Powell memo to change policy in Washington to favor the business roundtable, lower taxes. And that's, what type of populist is Trump? He followed Reagan's tax policies. The only difference really is the break with China, which had no coherence in terms of policy, but was probably the correct call, had to be made eventually. And
well, he did a couple of things that I think were positive. That's a major one. And the other, yes, I would say, was the pullout from Afghanistan. So, it got a lot of slamming by the media, but I don't think that was really a problem. That was under more Biden, right? That the idea was
it
he didn't handle it well.
Long overdue. It was handled in an embarrassing way.
It wasn't handled well, but often retreats are not handled well. Evacuations often don't go well. But indeed, so we shouldn't be demonizing. I believe as Democrats, it's a mistake to demonize leaders in the other party. It's better to just take them on policy grounds, or if they break the law, as Trump has done on many occasions, say, hey, here's how he broke the law, but not to treat them as some kind of other that's completely that their like has never been seen in American politics. Because there's, when you live in a glass house, it's never a good idea to throw stones, in my opinion. Let me ask you this, since we both agree, I think fundamentally the problems in the Democratic Party are very wide and very deep. Does it make sense? And I'm asking a question. I have my answer, but I'm curious about yours. What is the sense in trying to unite behind an alternative to the Democrats, much as the Whigs became subsumed by the Republicans in the 1850s, and the result ultimately was a good one. Slavery was abolished. So does that counsel in support of the Green Party and specifically a candidate like Cornel West?
Well, I have two levels of response on that, Hal. Theoretically, I'm in favor of it. And let's go back to your friend Jamie Raskin. His first book came out called Overruling Democracy, 2004, in the wake of the 2003, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision to overturn the Florida election, right? Which cost Gore the presidency, and he didn't contest it. Raskin at that time was serving as an attorney for third parties, including Jesse Jackson and I believe Ralph Nader. And the fight was against the two-party system, which makes it very hard to even get a third party registered in most states. And so look at the institutional change there. Now the interest, and so theoretically, I say yes. Third parties can have a very important influence. At the practical level, given the situation as it stands today, I'm not ready to jump in. After all my criticism of the Democrats, I would have to pull the lever for the current president as opposed to Trump or most likely any other Republican. But clearly, the country is dissatisfied. How can you rule out the possibility of something happening as a third party? The odds are against it in national history. It's very tough to pull off. So you notice I have not been writing about that. I'm not a Kennedy fan. I like the intellect and really the moral passion of Cornel West, but I don't think he can sell himself to the American people at this time. So that's my sense. Nothing personal on him. I think I understand him. I like to hear him speak. I'm not sure the average American goes with the style. And
yeah, you've mentioned that before, and I think that's a really interesting comment. I've heard that from others, Bill. The sort of preacher-like presentation, the brother and sister and all that. I personally, I'm kind of nonplussed by it. It doesn't really appeal to me or make Dr. West a more attractive candidate, but it doesn't dissuade me from supporting him either. But I hear what you're saying. Do you think, and this was a debate that Dr. West had with Jimmy Dore, a pretty extreme
I saw your video
host.
On that part of it, yeah.
And here's my question. Do you think Dore is right that from a purely political standpoint, West should focus exclusively on economic issues? Would that be the best way for him to capture a sizable vote?
Well, if you take political economy and politics seriously, which I try to do, I don't know whether I succeed. My answer to the fragmentation of modern American society, and let's limit it to inside the Democratic Party, a collection of disparate causes, all with their own bases, that have a very hard time pulling behind any grand theme. And the demise of the Green New Deal was the perfect example. So I do lean that the best common denominator to rebuild a New Deal type coalition is on economics, for what I just cited, that great transfer of wealth and the missing housing and missing national health insurance. You don't abandon all those other causes, but it's got to be a Green New Deal because you can't leave out, I think, the most powerful and widespread cause, which hasn't been able to win the environmental movement. And
I think you're 100% right on that. I just real quickly want to wrap a bow around that and play this clip I've had up there with the former speaker on the screen. But the way I believe you get the American people behind a Green New Deal is that you package it as an economic and environmental renaissance. The jobs are going to be American jobs. We're not going to be buying solar panels from China. We're going to buy them here. We are going to manufacture them here. Everything that all the economies or industries or what have you that spring up from or grow significantly as a result of our spending will be based in the United States and will create American jobs. I think if you do it and you always talk about it in that fashion, you would get real support.
Yeah, I do agree. I haven't heard any other strategy for bringing feminists, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, and I may be leaving out an initial, they keep being added.
Yep.
Decades go on gender issues, women rights issues, environmental issues, and then Hispanics and the whole immigration issue, which we didn't get to. How do you bridge those causes? And I've seen a withering summary of how the institutional Democratic Party deals. They don't deal with all these causes that make the party up. They deal with selected leaders, which can tend to get co-opted into, institutional caution. And that's how they put the brakes on the power behind all those movements, which if they could ever agree, would capture the party.
Well, it's such a tragedy, 100%, the slice and dice politics of the Democratic Party. But I think one of the great tragedies of the Obama movement is that he did unite us. There was, I think, a real sense of common purpose among many working people, white and black. Obama got a very high percentage of the working class vote for a Democrat in a presidential election, including the white working class vote. He won Indiana, he won Iowa, and he just let it all dissipate. And we don't have to go back and recapitulate all the mistakes, but or perhaps decisions that demonstrated ultimate indifference to the working class in America. But I think that was a great opportunity lost, just as 2016 and the chance to get Bernie into the White House, and to a lesser degree 2020 were opportunities lost. But I think Obama was really, there was a brief moment, a glimmer of hope that we had that was realistic in that time.
And how I understand it has not gotten a lot of publicity that there was an Obama working paper behind the scenes. I think it was before his election, that actually would have fleshed out what we're talking about, a uniting strategy based on a version of the Green New Deal stressing economics. And he never implemented it. It was dropped. And I think he was always more cautious than the left understood. Very dignified man, very dignified presidency. But really, I mean, he was the pattern of the party, upper middle
somewhat of a
class.
Brahmin in the end. I mean, his sensibilities are of the elite.
As the Clintons were. And
yes,
there is a withering new book on the Clintons out. And maybe we can talk about that after
maybe on another show. Let me just get this clip in. I've been wanting to. I watched this. I want to give the Washington Post some credit for putting this together. Let's see if we can hear this.
The ability to force votes to eject a speaker. Previous House Speaker, number 53, John Boehner, resigned before having to face such a vote in 2015.
It's become clear to me that this prolonged leadership turmoil would do irreparable harm to the institution. So this morning I informed my colleagues that I would resign from the speakership and resign from Congress at the end of October.
House Speaker number 52, Nancy Pelosi, changed from allowing any member to demand a vote to recall the speaker to requiring that a member of leadership do so, and there must be a majority agreement from the caucus to force such a vote. McCarthy agreed to lower the threshold for bringing the motion in order to shore up support to become Speaker in January. After McCarthy partnered with Democrats to pass spending legislation to fund the government, Gates introduced a resolution to remove McCarthy as House Speaker.
Look, I think Matt has planned this all along. It didn't matter what we transpired. He would have done it if we were in shutdown or not. I firmly believe it's the right decision to keep government open, to make sure our military is still paid, our border agents are still paid. And if that makes a challenge based upon whether I should be Speaker, I'll take that fight.
Let me let everyone know he prevailed in that Speaker contest because he made an agreement to fulfill certain commitments to make this an open and honest process, and he has failed to meet those commitments, and that's why we are here.
With zero support from Democrats and a handful of members in his own caucus voting against him, Kevin McCarthy was removed as Speaker in a 216 to 210 vote.
Yeah, so just real quick to kind of wrap this all up, and that I think that's a pretty nice synopsis. I think they did a good job with it at the Post. I wanted to very, not unemotional. I think it's very disingenuous of Gates. The bill that passed was one that the Republicans majority did support. I know he got a lot of support from Democrats, but he also, I believe, did get a majority of Republican votes in favor of that temporary spending bill. I think what Gates was really upset about was when it came to his attention that he thought that there was some sort of secret agreement to put more Ukraine funding on the table. I get why that would piss him off, but that's because it pisses me off. But that said, I think his argument is disingenuous. But I think if you really want to talk about dysfunction, I'll go back to what I said before. You watch that. It was only a very small minority of Republicans who were able to torpedo this speaker. If he was, why wouldn't the Democrats have just take 10, 15 Democrats, vote for him? I think Cori Bush may have, or maybe she abstained on the ground that there's not going to be anyone better, and we want a functioning government.
Yeah, I do want to say something historical here, which is, it's going to sound strange, but one of the best ways to understand the dynamics of the Republican Party since Reagan is to get a good book on the French Revolution, which is always seen as the classic pattern for future politics, define the political spectrum. But the revolution devoured itself at any number of points. It kept getting more and more radical, and it couldn't stop until it reached the point of absurdity with the guillotine and so forth. And that's where they are now. There's the logic that is out of control, and it ends in nothing good. So there's the analogy from what is viewed as a left-wing event to describe really conservative and libertarian attempt at a coup, if not a revolution.
I want to thank you
without a majority.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure and an honor and educational as well to speak with you, Bill. Thank you. We'll be back. I'll be back tomorrow for more Halitics. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe, and we'll have Bill back as soon as he wants to come. Have a great afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time it is while you're watching this. Thanks for being part of Halitics.